Okay, so first of all, we have to check and make sure I can be heard. Those of you online, can you hear me? Yes. All right. And I have to finish organizing myself a little bit. Okay, so we will begin this morning. I thought it'd be a good idea to just speak a little bit about what we chant at the beginning. There are some people who may not know, some people who might want a refreshment on why it is we chant what we do in the beginning of the teaching. So we start with the Vajradhara lineage prayer, the short Vajradhara prayer. And this Vajradhara prayer is, of course, as Rinpoche said, it really encapsulates the main instructions of our Kagyu lineage on Mahamudra meditation. In a few very short words, it's the words of a great master who spent many years meditating on an island in the middle of a lake in Tibet, completely undisturbed, and gained full realization of Mahamudra, and then became the teacher of the seventh Karmapa. So these are words with a lot of blessing that are chanted by people in monasteries and dharma centers all over the world. And they have been for centuries. Well, maybe not all over the world for centuries, but they've been chanted for centuries. And so that is why we recite these. They're a very good reminder, a good teaching on what we need to do to meditate. And then after that, we chant, before we have a teaching, we chant the short version of the seven branch prayer. That's the short verse on making offerings and prostrating and so forth. And then we make a mandala offering, which is where you imagine giving the entire world as an offering before the teachings. And then finally, there's a request to teach. And so the reason for these three is that, first of all, we want to make it, if you're going to receive a teaching, you have to be receptive to receive the teaching, right? You have to show that you want it. You have to be willing to give something to get the teaching. And so, of course, when we're making a mandala offering, on the one hand, it's kind of like just a pro forma. Oh, just do your hands like this, and where's your mala? Put your mala over it, and oh yeah, you could do that, but you can also imagine that as you're doing it, you're giving the entire universe. Whether you imagine it in the traditional way of the Mount Meru surrounded by four continents, or you can imagine giving the entire cosmos as we picture it today. Whatever, you imagine that you're giving everything to receive the precious teachings of the Buddha, because they're the most important thing in the world. So you should be able to be willing to give everything to do it. And so if you make this offering and do this visualization with this willingness, in order to receive the teachings, then it's going to make you more receptive, more able to hear the teachings. You'll remember how valuable they are. And then the third verse is the verse asking the Buddha to turn the wheel of Dharma, to give us teachings. And the reason we recite this is that the Buddhas don't teach unless you ask them to. Now, I'm someone like me. You told me to come, so I'm going to come and teach whether you teach it or not. You might think that, and it's probably true. But at the same time as you're reciting this, please turn the wheels of the common and greater vehicles. So that's asking the Buddhas to turn the teachings that are appropriate to whatever being as appropriate to that being, and not just in this one limited context. You should imagine that you're making this offering, you're making this request of all Buddhas in all realms, anywhere, in any universe. And of course, that means there are infinite Buddhas, and asking them to turn the wheel of the Dharma, to teach the Dharma. And doing so, there's great benefit, it's like, for example, when the Buddha Shakyamuni achieved enlightenment, he didn't teach for 7 weeks. Why not? Because he hadn't been asked to. Well, there are a couple of reasons, but one of the main ones, he wasn't asked to. And then Brahma and Indra came and asked him and made an offering to him so that he would then teach the Dharma. And so in the same way, we make that request to teach. It's kind of a small thing for a relatively small gathering, but if we use the power of our imagination, it then becomes a huge request, not just for this small circumstance, but for the vast circumstance of asking all the Buddhas in the 10 directions to teach. So please keep this in mind as we recite the prayers, the Vajradhara lineage prayer, and then the request to teach. And we'll recite it in English this morning. Mornings in English, afternoons in Tibetan, right? Om Great Vajradharate Bamila Prabha Vardam Malagam No 3 times Karma and lineage holders of the elder four and younger grade. The dragon tablets of the glorious Trova and so forth. Protectors of all the beings, the unequal double God. O Hagen Master of the profound Death Mahamudra. Om Kaju Gurus heed my prayer, lineage I uphold. Please bless me so I may adopt your ways of liberation. Just as revulsions taught to be the legs of meditation, this meditator does not cling to any food or wealth, and severs all the ties that bind me to this present life. Please bless me to be unattached to honor or to gain. Just as devotion's taught to be the head of meditation, continually this meditator supplicates the Guru, who opens up the door way to the truth of pith instructions. Please bless me so that uncontrived devotion may well forth, as non-distractions taught to be the core of meditation. This meditator just remains not altering at all. The fresh and pristine essence of whatever thought occurs. Please bless me to be free from thinking there's a meditation. Just as it's taught the essence of all thoughts is Dharmakaya. Not anything at all, and yet arising in all ways. Appearing for this meditator in unceasing play. Bless me to know samsara and nirvana, not to In all my future lifetimes may I never be apart from the authentic gurus and embrace the Dharma's glory. May I perfect the qualities of all the paths and levels, and may I swiftly realize the state of Vajradhara. I dedicate to enlightenment whatever slight merit I have gathered from prostrating and offering, confessing and rejoicing, requesting and from making supplications. This earth perfumed with scented water, strewn with flowers, graced with Mount Meadow, the forelands, the song. I visualize to be a Buddha, and offer so that beings enjoy perfectly pure. Please turn the wheel of Dharma of the great foundation and common vehicles according to the specific aims and intellects of sentient beings. The Dharma expanse palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly in my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted gurus. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And now please think to yourselves that we must bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space, with whom we've had connections of one sort or another through infinite lifetimes. And if we've had any connection with them, then at some point we've had very intimate connections where we've depended upon them. That's why we call them our mothers. And so they've done us great kindness in the past. And so we need to do what we can to repay the kindness they've given us. The only way to do that is to bring them all to the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood, to truly repay their kindness. And for that sake, we need to listen to the Dharma. So please listen to the Dharma this morning with this motivation of bodhicitta. The Dharma that we are listening to is The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. And of the 10 chapters, we are discussing the 9th chapter, the chapter on Prajna. This chapter has the 5 main topics. They are the benefits of Prajna, identifying what Prajna is, how to meditate on emptiness, refuting clinging to things, and the results of meditating on emptiness. So of these 5, we've been through the first 3. The first 2 we covered in May. So yesterday and the day before in the evening, we spoke about the methods of how to meditate on emptiness. This is the meditations on selflessness of the individual and the selflessness of phenomena. And so this brings us to the 4th one, refuting clinging to things. So refuting clinging to things means that we are trying to counter our habit of clinging to things as existing, as real. So when we say thing, a thing means something that can function, but it also means something that is real, something that has like some sort of independent existence. So we would say that, for example, you would say that your face is a thing because it can do things. But the reflection of your face in the mirror is not a thing. It doesn't exist independently from the mirror. That's what it seems to us in normal things. Or you can have like your vase of your bouquet of flowers, which I don't need to pick up today because I've picked it up so many times already. You've all seen it. You have your bouquet of flowers, and that's a thing. But if you have a picture of a bouquet of flowers, it's not a bouquet of flowers. It's a picture of it, and it doesn't serve the functions of that. But it looks like one. So really, when we're saying that we're trying to counter our clinging to things, what we're saying is we're trying to counter our idea, or not just an idea, but our deep inclination that the various appearances we see around us are functional things that can do things that we can either use or not use, that will harm us, that will help us, or that we're indifferent to. So overcoming that basic idea that things exist independently outside of ourselves, outside of other beings. And so that is the point that we've got to today. So in this discussion of the where is it? No, that's the wrong one. That's what we want. So in the discussion of refuting clinging to things, there are 2 aspects. First, it's to say that there's no way that you can prove that things exist. And the second is the disproof of things, to say that there's no proof of it, but you can also say that not only is there no proof of things, that you can also disprove, you can also negate things. So saying there's no proof of things means that you cannot in any way prove that things have independent existence, true existence. They do not exist independently, autonomously. So that is the first topic. And this picks up from where we left off yesterday evening. Maybe I should go back a few to show you that. Where was it? We had this bit about, here it is, the idea that there's what you're thinking of and what is thought of. You've got an analysis. When we're now analyzing the emptiness of phenomena, we are now analyzing something. We are either looking at, say, for example, the bouquet of flowers, or our bodies, or feelings, or whatever we are thinking about. We are thinking about something. And then there is us thinking about it. There's the analysis. So we've got the thought and what is thought of. So these are the 2 things that are shown to be not independent of each other, but in fact dependent on each other. When we now analyze them, we talk about them in terms of how they're commonly presented. And so those are the 2 things that we are talking about here when it says, for those to whom these 2 seems true, this is extremely difficult. So if you think that the thing that you're analyzing, so I might as well get my prop. If you've got the bouquet, if you think this is a real thing, and then you think that the thought that analyzes, in other words, your mind that's analyzing, if you think that those 2 are real, then it's very difficult to make it work, because it's hard to prove that the thing exists. And if the thing doesn't exist, then how can the thing that thought about it exist? Right? So when you're seeing when you're knowing something, then it has to be there for you to know it. Otherwise, it's just a figment of your imagination. So if the mind has no object, no real object. The mind itself is not reliable. It's not true. It's not. Also, the mind is dependent upon the external object, and so this way they're one dependent upon each other. And it's hard to say that the external object exists, and if you can't say that the external objects exist, it's hard to say that the mind that perceives it also exists. You can't, right? So these two are dependent upon each other. Because when you talk about how things are known, if the way we know can prove that something exists is because you say, I know it, I see it, I hear it, I can reason about it, I know it. So as Shantideva says in the next two lines, if entities are proven by knowing, what basis does knowing have to exist? So your entity, your bouquet of flowers, we know it exists because we can see it, right? You look and you see the bouquet of flowers. And if you're wearing your reading glasses, if you're holding them this close, I can't really see them. This is kind of like an orange blob for me. But there's this bouquet of bouquet of flowers right here. We know that there's a bouquet of flowers because you can see it, right? But if you examine the bouquet of flowers, where is it? Are these single? Are they multiple? We went through a couple analyses earlier today. We'll go through other analyses. Yesterday, we'll go through other analyses in a few minutes. There's no way you can prove that the flowers exist. The flowers, like all the petals and all the parts that put together, and then you pull the parts apart, they go into smaller and smaller parts. You can't find anything in the end. So if you can't prove that this exists, then what is your, like when you're seeing, and you see a bouquet of flowers and think this is a bouquet of flowers. How can that? What basis does that have? The cognition of a bouquet of flowers arises from the object, the bouquet of flowers, because all cognitions arise from four conditions, including the objective condition, as I mentioned yesterday. The objective condition means that there's an object. There's something that you're seeing or something that you're thinking about. And that is one of the conditions. If the conditions for something to arise are not present, then it cannot arise. So the conditions of the objective condition, the dominant condition or faculty. You have the causal condition, which is a preceding instant of conscious. The causal condition is what? The causal condition is basically anything, and then there's the immediate condition, which is a preceding instant of consciousness. All four of these have to be present. If you take one away, there can't be a consciousness of a bouquet. So there's no bouquet, there's no consciousness of a bouquet. So without the bouquet, it can't arise. But if the bouquet doesn't really exist, then the cognition of the bouquet is also false. It also does not really exist. But if what's known proves there is knowing, what basis has what's known for being? So we know that this is if this being, if what is known, that is the known object, the bouquet, proves that there is cognition or knowing of that, then what basis has what's known for being? How do we know that this is here? It's kind of like a chicken and an egg. You have to have the known object in order for there to be a cognition of it. You have to have the cognition to know that there's a known object. One can't go without the other. You can't prove either. If each exists by force of the other, then neither of them could exist. In other words, when we're saying exist, we're saying something that's independent, autonomous, has some reality of its own. We're not saying that they don't appear. When we hold up the bouquet, we have some sort of a cognition, no matter what your level of faculty. If you have some degree of sight, you're going to see something which might look like a bouquet, it might look like an orange blob, but you're going to have something. That's not refuting that. We're not refuting that you have experienced the appearance of the flowers. We experience that. We see the appearance. But what it is refuting is that is something that's real, that exists independently. It's not. It's dependent upon our mind. And our mind, likewise, also depends on everything around it. In other words, they're saying that everything is linked and nothing exists independently. As an analogy, one's not a parent without a child, so how then can the child arise? Without a child, there is no parent. Likewise, these two are non-existent. For example, for someone to be born, until they develop artificial wombs, you have to have a mother, right? You have to have the mother. But she's not a mother until the baby's born, right? Because before a woman has a child, she's not a mother. But the child has to have a mother. So, but before the child, there's no mother, right? So, in order for her to be a mother, there has to be a child. Once there's a child, she becomes a mother. But that child cannot be there unless it's born. And in order to be born, the child needs a mother. So the mother has to be there first. So, in other words, we're saying that they are dependent on each other. There are different ways that things depend on each other. There's this way, like mother and child, in a sense, is talking about the labels that we give things, the conceptual things, like the idea of a mother cannot exist without a child cannot exist without the mother. So the idea of mother is dependent upon the existence of a child. The woman may already be there, right? But she's not yet a mother until the child is born. So we don't give her that name. So that's one way. The other is that the child cannot be born without a mother. They need a woman to give them birth, right? With no woman giving them birth, the child can't be born. So that's also being that child is therefore dependent upon the woman as like the cause that produces them. So the different types of interdependence. One is the interdependence of a causal relation. The other is the interdependence of things being labeled in relation to each other. In either way, neither of them really exists as an independent thing. If things have a causal relationship, then they don't have independent existence. They depend upon their causes. The child depends upon the mother depends upon her causes. It's like a whole house of cards. You stack it up just perfectly, and a mother is able to give birth and have a child. Then you can give the labels child and mother. Before that, you can't. So it's all dependent upon, everything's dependent upon each other. There's nothing that is there's no one who is just inherently a mother or inherently a child. Or if we go back to a father and child, we can use the example I gave the other night of Donald and Fred, or Fred and Donald Jr., right? It's the same thing. They're father and son in relation to each other, mother and child, or mother and child in relation to each other. So everything is interdependent. And therefore they are non-existent, not that they don't appear, not that we can't use the words automatically, use the words in daily speech, but that there's nothing inherent about them. So how this is different from a shoot and seed. So like you have a seed, and a seed grows a shoot, right? You plant the seed, it grows. You plant your pea seed, it grows a pea shoot. So a shoot arises from a seed, and due to this, the seed is known. Why do we know the object exists? Through the cognition it produces. So here the opponent, someone who's a realist, someone who says that things really exist, they say you plant the seed, and then the shoot grows. And you can see this, you know this, therefore they really exist. And it's the same for the mind. You have we know the object exists, the bouquet exists because we know the thing. Shantideva says these two are different because the cognition that results from the bouquet is known, it would have to know itself. A mind that's other than the shoot realizes that there was a seed. How is it known that there exists a knower by which the known is realized? So when you know that there was a pea seed because you see a pea shoot and you see the shoot of a pea plant, when you know that, then you realize then you're realizing the seed, and that knowing is separate from the shoot and from the seed. But when you know that your mind exists because it is because you can know that the object, you know that there's the how can you know that there's the knower that of the bouquet that results from the object, right? The knowledge of the object or the cognition of the object results from the object, right? So therefore, what knows that that cognition exists? When you see the pea shoot, that therefore lets you know that there was a seed, the mind is different from the shoot. So if the mind, what knows that the mind is there? Does it take another cognition? If it does, then it's like an infinite regress. It's just another mind has to know that one. Another one mind has to know that one. And another has to know that one. So that's not logical. And as the Buddha said in the sutras, and we spoke about last May, the mind does not know itself. So Shantideva. Now, brings up the issue of self-awareness. Sometimes we often talk about self-awareness. Shantideva is talking about a real mind knowing itself, really knowing itself. If you have the illusion of knowing itself, we all have that illusion. That's fine in relative terms. This is so if you have an illusory mind that it has an illusory sort of self-awareness, that's okay. But if you think that there's a real mind that knows itself truly, that's a bit of a problem. That's hard to say. Because you have an illusion, illusions can do all sorts of things. For example, you have a computer game, you can do all sorts of things in, well, I really don't know. I hear that you can do all sorts of things in computer games that you can't do in real life. You can even see that in a film. You go to any action film and you'll see all sorts of stunts that are just almost impossible in real life, unless it's a Tom Cruise action film where he does his own stunts, right? They're just impossible to do. No one could ever do that. And yet we see it because of CGI or whatever. So our minds, our self-awareness is kind of like the CGI and the special effects movies. It's making things happen that aren't real, but they appear to us. So we appear to know our own mind. So that's how self-awareness would work in Shantideva's. It's not a real existent self-awareness. It's that we have. We have an illusory self-awareness of knowing the mind. Essentially, like when Trungpa Rinpoche would speak about self-awareness, he often clarified this point, especially when talking about things like this. Self-awareness here is just the capacity of the mind to know itself. It's not something else. And also Dharmakirti makes this very clear. It's like you have a cognition of a bouquet and you know it. So that cognition is, on the one hand, it's a cognition of the bouquet. You see the bouquet and you know the bouquet, but at the same time, because it's a cognition, it knows itself. It knows that there's the image of a bouquet. It knows that there's an image of someone perceiving the bouquet. We mistake these for being two separate things, but in actuality, it's just awareness of itself. And this is a kind of illusory. It doesn't truly exist. There's no cognition that you can actually find anywhere. The images that we appear, the image of the object doesn't have any independent existence. The image of a knower doesn't have any independent existence. All kind of an illusion that we see. So it's a lot like, a CGI computer-generated effects in a movie that couldn't possibly happen, but we see and they appear to us. So that's how it is. So the mind doesn't have true existence. It's also illusory. So that was the proof of the things. And so now we've come to the second topic, which are the 5 great logics of the middle way. So we have to go through, I have to mention them. The first of these, because these are the important logics. Now, Shantideva doesn't speak about all of them, but there are 5 great logics of the middle way that I thought would be good. Actually, all the commentaries mention them at this point, or several of the commentaries mention them at this point. So I need to mention all 5 of them. So I'll go through 3 of them very briefly, and then we'll spend more time on the other 2. So the first of these is the logic of interdependence. And then the second is the analyzing the essence, that things are neither single nor multiple. So this is like when you look at a bouquet and you decide that it's not a single thing because you can't find any single thing, but it can't be multiple either, because multiple means that there are many individual things that you count together. If you can't count the individual things, you can't count a multiple. So that's analyzing the essence of phenomena. The third is analyzing how things arise, refuting the 4 possibilities of arising. The fourth is analyzing the cause, Vajra splinter argument. So this is kind of a funny name. We'll get to that one. And the fifth is analyzing the result, refuting that something either existent or non-existent arises. So I'm just going to go through all of these briefly, because I think as we go through them, If you have some sort of a little idea, a bit of an idea about what these logics are, when we actually get to the ones that are described in the text, it'll be a little bit easier for you. So the first of these is the interdependence, which in fact we were just speaking about with the knower and the known object. They're interdependent, right? Things do not exist by nature because they are interdependent, like illusions. So in the old days, back in Shantideva's time, if you wanted to create an illusion, you have to have an illusionist who would know the spells and have little sticks and stones that would then appear as horses and elephants. These days, all you need is a computer and some fancy software, and you can make whatever illusion you want. But you have to have the sort of causes, and you have the causes, and they make an illusion. So everything is dependent upon its causes. In the same way, everything that appears to us is dependent upon causes and conditions and appears, but it's actually in nature like an illusion. So this is like, for example, long and short. I've done this before many times, and I'm sorry, I know there are some people who might not have seen this before. Trungpa Rinpoche did it many times. I thought about doing this little parlor trick for you, but I won't today. Basically, anytime you have something that's long, it's got to be in relation to something that's short. Short is only short in relation to long. If you have something that is this long, is that distance long or short? Well, it depends, because you might have something in relation to something shorter, it's long. So long and short are dependent upon each other. The other example is like a lamp and its light. So in order to have the lamp light, you have to have the bowl of the lamp, the oil, the wick, and the heat that starts the combustion of the wick, and so forth. And then you'll finally have the light. If you don't have any of those conditions, then the lamplight will not appear. You have to have the conditions. Similarly, everything else comes out of its causes and conditions. And therefore, they're dependent upon their causes and conditions. So everything is related to each other through an incredible web of causes and conditions. And in this way, everything is interdependent. Or the other one is like parent and child. And so we just discussed parent and child, so I'm not going to belabor that one. And then the second great logic is the logic of analyzing the essence, neither single nor multiple. A sprout does not exist in reality because it is neither single nor multiple. So this is the one where Rinpoche always did the example of the hand, and I kind of did it in very short form yesterday. You've got a hand. So I'll do my Rinpoche imitation for this one. This is a hand. This is a hand, right? Right? So I've got one hand. Is this one hand, right? Okay. So what is the hand? Is this the hand? No, this is the thumb. Is this the hand? It's the index finger. It's the middle finger. That's the ring finger and the little finger. The palm is not the hand. The back of the hand is not the hand. So the hand is not really there. And if you look at the individual parts, then the fingers get divided into knuckles. This is what Shantideva said. And the knuckles can be divided down into smaller and smaller parts until you get to atoms. And then it's just like he said in verse 86, the parts too divide into atoms, dividing atoms into sides. Those two can split and have like space, no parts, so there are no atoms either. In the end, you can't even find the atoms. So if there are no atoms, you cannot say that there is anything single here. And if you don't have a single thing, then you can't have two. So this hand is not one thing, right? And it's 1 + 1 = 2, right? So if this is not one, this hand is also not one, right? Therefore, these are not two hands. They're not multiple. If you don't have a single hand and then a second single hand, you can't have two hands, right? You need to have two single hands, but there's no single hand. If there's no single hand, how can you have two? If you can't have two, how can you have 3 or 4 or any other number, right? I won't start trying to talk about Frege and his ideas of number theory and so forth, which is all just talking about ideas, really, which is also not real. So the third logic is analyzing how things arise, refuting the 4 possibilities of arising. This is saying that if something's going to arise, it's going to arise in one of 4 different ways. These 4 different ways are either you have a single cause, produces a single result. A single match makes a single fire. Or a single cause would produce multiple results. A single match lights many fires. Or you can have many causes produces a single result. You've got the match, you've got the wick, you've got the oil, you've got the base of the lamp, you've got everything, and that produces the fire of a lamplight, making a single result. Or you would have multiple causes that producing multiple results. The lamps and multiple lamps, multiple bowls of oil, multiple wicks, and multiple matches producing multiple lamp flames, right? So those are the 4 alternatives, but none of these are logical because, as we discussed earlier, nothing really arises. We already went through refuting the arising of everything in verse, or we will, no, it's below, is it? Is it below or above? No, it's above. It's a discussion of the mindfulness of dharmas in such a way one cannot realize the arising of any phenomena. So if no phenomena is arising, as we discussed yesterday, how can there be they can arise a single or multiple result arise from either single or multiple causes? So this one is not really fleshed out in most of the commentaries. And then here's one of the ones that Shantideva does speak about, the Vajra splinter argument. So things do not exist because they do not arise, either from themselves, from something other, from both, that is, both from themselves and from something other, or from neither. So all 4 of these are illogical. So this is called the Vajra splinter object because it's really powerful logic. And so just like a Vajra, Indra's weapon, the Vajra, is indestructible, this logic is also indestructible. So things don't exist because they don't, something, in order to exist, something has to arise. It has to be there. In order to be there, it has to arise. So do things come from themselves or from other or from both or from neither themselves or both? Things, another way of phrasing the same thing is that Mikya Dorje wrote, basically gave the same proof saying, a sprout does not arise because it does not arise from any of the 4 alternatives for arising, like the mane of a toad. The example here, the toads don't have manes. Lions and horses have manes, toads do not. Similarly, so the mane of a toad does not arise from itself or other or both or neither. And similarly, the sprout does not arise from other or not. So the reason why it does not arise from these 4 alternatives is that things do not arise from themselves. First of all, it's the first that we look at generally. If they have not yet arisen, they do not exist, so they cannot act as a cause. So a sprout does not arise from itself because before there is a sprout, in order for the sprout to exist, it has to arise. But before it has arisen, it does not exist. So it cannot arise from itself. Things cannot arise from the non-existent. It would like, it's like, what do we say? Knitting socks out of turtle fur, right? You can't do it because there's no turtle fur. So in the same way, the sprout cannot arise before it has already from itself because it has to arise from something that already exists. If they have already arisen, there is no point for them to re-arise. So if the sprout has already arisen and it arises from itself anyways, there's no point to that. It already exists. There's no need for it to re-arise. And also, it would never cease arising from itself because it's always there. If it is always producing itself, it would continually produce itself. It would never stop producing itself. And so then that sprout would keep on producing itself and we'd have more sprouts than we could eat. Okay, things do not arise from something other because anything would arise from something else. So you say, well, but sprouts don't arise from themselves. They arise from the seed, and the seed is other. But we see that things don't arise from things that are other. If one thing arose from something else, then anything could arise from anything else. If the seed is truly other than the sprout, then anything could arise from anything because they're different. The logic is the same. And the other reason why things don't arise from something other is because there is no other. None of them can be found to exist. This argument is less commonly given, but it's also an interesting argument. You could use the argument of saying neither single nor multiple, any of the analysis, to see that things do not truly exist. Then things don't arise from both. What is it? If the thing is not established because there's neither single nor multiple, how can there be another? Right. So this is looking at that same logic as we discussed before, the logic of being neither single nor multiple. Not arising from both or neither. Things do not arise from the self and from the other. Well, you'd say, well, the sprouts arise from the seed or from the shoot and the seed and the earth and the soil and the water and the sunlight and all that. But Shantideva says that things do not arise from both self and other because the faults of arising from self and from other would all apply. In other words, all the problems of arising from themselves, that is, the problems of not arising from, they can't arise from the self that doesn't exist. They can't, if they've already exist, they can't, there is no need for them to arise, and they'd arise continuously. And the faults of them arising from something else, that everything would produce everything, would all apply. And then the final one is that things do not arise from neither self nor other, that is, completely without causes, because they would have no cause, as it is seen that all things have causes. Can you find anything in this world that does not arise without a cause? There's nothing that arises without causes. Okay, so that's the Vajra splinter object argument. Then we come to the next one, is analyzing the result, refuting that something either existent or non-existent arises. So here the argument is formulated that mere appearances have no nature because the existent does not arise. The non-existent does not arise either. Appearances are like an illusion. So we have the appearance of the bouquet. That appearance has no nature. There's no real own being, own existence to this. Why? Because if it doesn't arise. The reason why it doesn't arise is that if it already exists, so it doesn't arise. If it does not exist, it's non-existent. Something that's non-existent can't arise. I'm like rabbit horns. Rabbit horns don't arise. Rabbits don't grow horns. So the existent doesn't arise and the non-existent doesn't arise, and therefore nothing existent can arise. Appearances are like an illusion. So this is speaking primarily how the appearances that we have are illusory. We experience them. They kind of work in the relative way things go, but they do not truly exist. So these are the five great proofs of the five great logics of the middle way. And of these five great logics, Shantideva doesn't talk about the first three. He doesn't talk about the logic of interdependence. Nor does he talk about the argument of being neither single nor multiple, analyzing the essence. And he also doesn't talk about the argument of refuting the arising of a single or multiple cause producing single or multiple results. But what he does speak about are the Vajra splinter object and the Vajra splinter logic and the logic of analyzing the result. So to go on and speak about those, to start with, we'll speak about the Vajra splinter. The Vajra splinter object argument is generally shown in the order of, not in the text in the middle way. Mostly it's presented in the order: first you analyze whether things arise from themselves, then you analyze whether they arise from something other, then you then you examine whether they arise from both, and fourth you examine whether they arise without a cause. That's the general order that they're taught. But Shantideva teaches them in a different order. So he first teaches that refuting that things arise without a cause. Second, he refutes that they arise from something other. In the third, he refutes that things arise from themselves. The fourth section, he teaches that cognition of the non-existence of the object is valid. And finally, he teaches what is validly realized. What do we know from this logic? Now, when we're talking about all of these logics, what we are doing is, in the middle way, there are two ways you can use logic. You can use logic to prove the existence of something, or you can use logic to disprove something, to refute, or to negate something, to refute an idea. So in many schools, they try to prove something. Like you try to prove that there is something that exists, that there's a primal nature, a soul, or so forth, and you present proofs. So that's one way of doing logic. But in the middle way, the idea they say that any time you're trying to prove something, it can all be torn down logically. So none of it actually really works. Proving something is very difficult. So instead, they work to refute arguments and not take a position from themselves. In other words, they're trying to negate. Things do not exist. Things are not non-existent. They're not both. They're not neither. The Purusha, the individual self, the self of phenomena, do not exist, but without positing anything to say in their place. In their place. The idea is to use the logics to overcome all of your clinging, so that then you are able to see the true empty nature of all phenomena by completely eliminating your attachment to anything. So this is a very powerful way of doing logic, but it can also sometimes feel a little bit, what do we say, nihilistic, because there's none of this. That doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. You think that there's nothing, but it's not saying that. Basically, what we're refuting is our clinging to things as being real, independent. So when we're saying that things do not arise from themselves, we're saying that we're not saying that appearances do not occur in our mind. We do perceive things. We do have these different perceptions we experience. So this does happen, but they do not have independent existence or independent they do not have any existence of their own separate from us or anything else, and we do not have any existence of our own. It's to overcome all of our clinging to things as being somehow real. So back to Shantideva. Okay, first we're going to refute that things arise without a cause. And this is easy. First, all the people of the world can see perceptually all causes. Distinctions of lotus stalks and such are born of distinctions in the causes. So we can see in the world that everything comes out of a cause. If you're going to make something, you have to have the material that you're going to do to make it. For example, if you want to make yourself some bread, you have to have the flour, water, salt, and whatever else you're going to, yeast and whatever else you're going to put in your bread, right? You have to have those. You have to have someone who's going to make the bread. You have to have an oven to bake in. All of these are causes, and the finished loaf of bread that you've made is the result. It comes from causes. There is no loaf of bread that just appears magically, unless you go to standard baking. And even there, they use flour too. They have to buy their flour. That's what makes it hard for them to get a profit. Distinctions of lotus stalks and such are born of distinctions in the causes. So like when you have a lotus flower, some are large, some are small, some are slightly darker, some the flowers are just slightly different colors. The leaves are slightly different shapes. They're close. They're all lotus leaves, and they're lotus flowers, but they're all slightly different. And the reason for that is that there are different causes. I mean, for example, if you plant lotuses in a place that's really conducive to lotus, you're going to get big, beautiful flowers. If you plant it someplace where they don't grow too well, you're going to get tiny, sort of wimpy, wilted lotus flowers. Or another way is if you're making the bread, if you put rye flour in, you're going to get rye bread. If you put spelt in, you're going to have spelt bread. The distinctions of the bread, the finished loaf, come from the distinctions of the causes. And so what makes the distinctions in the causes, this is with the opponent or Shantideva's interlocutor saying, what makes the distinctions in the causes? Distinctions in the preceding causes. Well, because the spelt and the wheat are different because they come from different plants. then why can a cause produce a result? It's from the previous cause's power. So everything, because everything is a cause, it's also got the power to produce a result if the conditions are appropriate for it to produce a result. So that power just comes from having been a cause itself. And in fact, you can say that I'm going to digress here. A cause and a result are basically anything that's a cause is also a result. And this means that any result is also a cause. So the flour is the cause, is the result of the wheat, but it's also the cause of bread. The bread is a cause, is a result of the wheat, but it's also a cause of toast. Yeah. Okay. You gave it to me, toast. Okay. So then the next one is refuting that things arise from a cause that is other. And here, Shantideva does not present the whole argument because he's already gone through quite a bit of it. He's already been through the idea that things don't arise from atoms, that they don't arise from various other things. And so instead of what he spends most of his time speaking about is refuting the idea that there is a creator God who made everything. So he first has refuting a creator God. The second is section is the results of a creator God are impossible. Third, it is impossible for it is contradictory for God to be a creator. And fourth, refuting arising from atoms. So he goes through this because he doesn't go through the entire logics as you would find them in the middle way texts. He does it in this briefer way because he's already discussed quite a bit of this. So refuting a creator God, and when we talk about the refutation of the creator God, the first thing that is important to understand is that the particular idea of a creator God differs from tradition to tradition. And Shantideva was in India, where people were primarily had Vedic ideas. Now, even in the Vedas, in the Vedic traditions, there are different ways of conceiving of Ishvara or God. But it's also important to realize that he's not talking specifically about the God as conceived in the Christian tradition. So some of his arguments against a creator God would also apply to a Christian God, but not all of them. Some of them are directed in particular towards the Vaisheshika school. So I'm not going to quiz you on which school it was, but just remember it was a Hindu school. The Hindu school that begins with a V, Vaisheshika. So they say that there is a God, and the Sanskrit word for God is Ishvara. All right. So if God is the cause of sentient beings, please tell us first, please, what is God? So they have this idea of God as being pure, pristine, permanent, the creator of everything, as being worthy of being worshipped. But they also say, well, he's the elements of earth, water, fire, and air. So they say, the elements, you say, so be it. Why bother over mere name? So if you say that the elements are the cause of everything, well, we'll agree, because we'd say that all physical things arise from earth, water, fire, and air. Then if you want to add the elements of space and consciousness, fine. Then it's just a name. There are causes, they're relative causes, so what? There's no difference, right? But they can't be a God like the Vaisheshika thinks about it, because they think of God as being singular and permanent and as being a living or animate. And so they say, but Shantideva says, but earth and such are multiple. That is, they're not singular. They're impermanent. They're not like God. They're inanimate, and they're not divine. They're stepped upon and filthy, so they are not God. You wouldn't step on God because God is worthy of reverence. You don't step on what you revere. And they're also filthy. Like if you get yourself covered with dirt, what do? You go and take a shower. So it's not, so the elements cannot be God. So this is particularly a Vaisheshika position that he's refuting. And then they say, space is not God since it's inert. There's nothing, space doesn't do anything. In fact, space is just kind of like absence. It's nothing. So it's inert. The self is not God. It's been refuted. We've already talked about the individual self. So the self cannot be God. An inconceivable creator is beyond thought. Why speak of it? So this does kind of apply to the Christian idea, a God who's ineffable and inconceivable. Well, if you can't conceive of it, how can you say it's a creator? You have no idea whether it's a creator or not because you can't conceive of it. Why bother even speaking about it? There's no way to tell. It's just completely beyond us. If it's completely beyond us, what good does it? Good does the Creator God to us? What good does the Creator God do for us? So the second main topic is saying that the results of a Creator God are impossible. There's nothing God creates. They're refuting that the self is God and teaching that cognition arises from karma. So these three are all taught in these 6 lines. So what do you posit he creates? What do you posit that God creates? Does he create a self? We've already refuted that there's a self. Aren't that and earth and such and God by nature permanent? So the Vaisheshika school says that the self is permanent. The elements of earth, water, fire, and air are all permanent. So if they're permanent, how can they be created? They already exist. If they're created, they cannot be permanent. They're impermanent by nature. Then cognition arises doesn't arise from God. Cognition arises from its object and from the previous cognition and its causes, as we just described. It's not like God makes it. If you were going to see your bouquet of flowers, it's not like God is making you see the bouquet of flowers. It's the fact that you're looking at them and it's there to see, and there's light. So you can see it. You have all those conditions and it produces it. It's not like Ishvara comes down from the abode of the high abodes and produces a cognition in your mind. And when you have pleasure and pain, those come from our actions. Our pleasures and our pains come out of our actions, out of our karma. So God doesn't create those. So please tell us, what does God create? So the self is not a God. The earth and anything else is not a God. What is it that gods are creating? So the results are impossible. It's impossible for God to produce a result because there's nothing that we can see doesn't arise from something else. So what does God create? And it's also contradictory for God to be a creator. And if the cause has no beginning, how is there beginning to results? So God is permanent and singular and animate. So if God is permanent, according to the Vaisheshika school, then he has no beginning. Because he has no beginning, then he would if he's permanent and he's creating, he'd be creating in every single instant. So if the cause has no beginning, then how's there a beginning to results? All of the results would have had to be there from the very first moment. If the results are not there, or if some results appear later, then God is actually impermanent because at some time he's producing one result, another time he's producing another result, and a third time he's producing a third result. And so he's changing in every moment. And why is he not creating always? He's not dependent on something else. There's nothing else he did not make, so what could he depend upon? He would always, so a permanent God would always be creating everything in every single instant. Now, according to the Vaisheshika, he doesn't depend upon anything to create. He just naturally does it. So he'd have to create it all the time. There's nothing that he didn't create. So what is there that he could depend on that would make him create in some moments, but not in others, and still be a permanent, omnipotent, omniscient God? If he is dependent, the assembly would be a cause. If you say, well, he's dependent, God can create things, but all the conditions have to come together. Well, we see that all the conditions come together. If you have the electricity and the light switch, and you flick the light switch, the light's going to come on. God doesn't have to come and turn the light switch on for you, does he? You turn the light switch on yourself. So when the causes are assembled, then the result is produced. When they're not assembled, then the result does not appear. And this is what we see in our daily life. If he is descended, the assembly, that is the assembly of causes, would be the cause, and God would not. When they're assembled, when the causes come together, God would have no power to not create, and when they're not, no power to create. So he wouldn't be able to make things appear when the assembly of causes were present or not, were not present, or he wouldn't be able to go against to override the assembly of the causes. If God creates without the wish to do so, it follows he's controlled by something else. And if he wants to, he depends on that. Even creating, how is he almighty? So if God does not have the wish to create anything, then something else is making him create. He's got no intention to create. But if he has that, and if he gets a wish to do something, then he's dependent upon that wish. So he's not independent. He's also dependent on something else. So therefore, how is he almighty? So that's the refutation of the creator God. And then the next is refuting arising from atoms. Those who say atoms are permanent have been refuted earlier. So we've already spoken about the refutation of atoms and how they're not permanent, and how, in fact, they cannot exist as single partless articles. As we just mentioned a moment ago, there's this verse 86, the parts two divide into atoms, dividing atoms into sides. Those two split and can have, like space, no parts, so there are no atoms either. So we've already been through atoms. Okay, so that was talking about arising from something other. Then the next thing that things can arise from is arising from themselves. And this, again, we get to the Sankhya primal nature. So let's review the Sankhya school a little bit. We've been through it a few times, right? So what do we have with the Sankhya school? We have primal nature. And we have a permanent, the primal nature is singular and permanent. And you have a singular and permanent self. You've got these two things, right? The self knows. And what does it know? Everything it knows is a manifestation of the primal nature, right? And that primal nature actually is made up of three different qualities. These qualities, in Sanskrit, they're called sattva, rajas, and tamas. These three qualities. So everything is, but I'm not going to belabor the point. I'm not going to quiz you about the three qualities. What are the three qualities for 10 points? Or I should say, what are the three qualities for $100? You might listen more. Right? Might be easier to remember. Should we have a game show? They're the three qualities of sattva, rajas, and tamas. But these three qualities, actually, each of the qualities is made up of the three qualities. So sattva is also made up of sattva, rajas, and tamas. Tamas is made up of all three. And the third is also made up of all three. So they all have three parts. It's like kind of 9 parts. So none of them are singular. You've got all these different qualities that come together. So you've got this primal nature that's made up of the three qualities. Each of the three qualities is made up of itself, of all three qualities. When they're in balance, then it's just the primal nature. When they get out of balance, then they manifest as everything we experience: feelings, sights, sounds, the elements, being able to go, the faculties, everything. It all is a manifestation of the primal nature. And the self is basically just observing all of this, right? So this is the Sankhya idea. We'll go a little bit into it today. We've still got a little bit of time. So back to our presentation here. Oh, sorry, wrong one. That's what we want. Share. Okay, so the three sections here: refuting the Sankhya primal nature, refuting the assertion that pleasure and so forth are permanent, and refuting that the result abides within the cause. These are the three sections. So first is refuting the Sankhya primal nature. So to do that, we present the position. The permanent primal substances, the cause of beings, hold the Sankhyas. They say that when the qualities, the so-called sattva, rajas, and tamas are balanced, that's the primal substance. Unbalanced, they're called the world. So this is what I was just explaining. You've got the primal nature, it's permanent. The primal substance is permanent, and it is the cause of beings and everything. And so it has made up of the three qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas. When they're in balance, it's the primal substance, and unbalanced, it's called the world. It's all the manifestations of the world. So Shantideva says, For one to have three natures is illogical, so it's non-existent. So if the primal nature is a single thing that's permanent, but it also has three natures, how can it be both one and three at the same time? It can't. It's not a single permanent thing. If it is made up of three natures, it's got to be three different things. Likewise, the qualities don't exist for each of them as triple too. So they say that each of the three qualities is made up of all three qualities. It's kind of like this three is like three qualities, and each dividing to three, sort of like nine. If that's the nature, each of them is triple, then none of them are single qualities. So they're triple, right? They're triple, not single. Being triple and single at the same time is difficult, right? So therefore, they do not exist either. And so refuting the sound and so forth, the qualities produced. So the sound and so forth, as Shantideva says, it is far-fetched for sound and such to exist without the qualities. So the qualities, when they're out of balance, appear as all the things we experience in the world. And in the Samkhya system, they list sound first. So Shantideva says sound here. So everything, all the sounds we hear, all the sights we see, everything we smell or experience comes out of the primal nature. But if the primal nature doesn't exist because it's made up, is not a single thing, not a single permanent thing, and the qualities don't exist, then how can the things that are manifest from it exist? Like if you're going to make bread, you have to use flour, right? If you use imaginary flour, are you going to come up with real bread? You'd be putting your empty bread tins in the oven, and you wouldn't get any toast, right? So then there'd also be the absurd consequence of pleasure and so forth existing on earth and so forth. So everything you experience is actually, in the Sankhya position, is said to be everything you experience is a manifestation of the primal nature of these three qualities in various combinations. And so that means that when you experience pleasure, it's not something in your mind, it's something that's in the object. And in fact, each of the qualities is associated with one of the feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So sattva is pleasant, rajas is unpleasant, tamas is neutral. So these are the feelings, are pleasant, painful, and neutral. So they say that the pleasure, the pleasant feeling of something like a blanket or whatever. You put on a blanket, it's warm, it's comfortable, it feels nice. That's pleasure, right? That pleasure is part of the blanket. If you were to lie on a bed of nails, it would be painful. And that pain is inherent, it's part of the nails, right? So they're saying that the feeling that you experience is in the object, not in the perceiver, but in the object. That it's real because it's part of the sattva, rajas, and tamas that they say are real. So this is the point that Shantideva is refuting here. And pleasure and such aren't possible in cloth and other mindless things. So basically, Shantideva is saying, but pleasure isn't in the object, it's in the mind. We've already spoken about that. It's the mind that feels something is pleasurable. Like we spoke about yesterday, the pleasure of chocolate really depends upon, or whether chocolate is pleasurable or not, depends upon the mind. For us, it's pleasurable. For Tibetans, it's not. Salt tea is pleasurable for Tibetans and not for many Westerners. Not all. Some like it. If the nature of their causes is things, haven't we analyzed things already? So if you say that the cause of pleasure and so forth is things, we've already examined things and see that they can't exist. So how can they exist? For you, the cause is pleasure and such, but blankets and don't arise from them. But blankets, if you say that cause is part of the primal, that the pleasure that is part of the primal nature is the cause of a blanket, that's not the cause of a blanket. The cause of a blanket is threads and weavers and all that. Pleasure and so forth come from blankets. Without them, there is no pleasure and such. So the pleasure and so forth are produced when you put on the blanket and it is nice and toasty warm. So without the blanket and so forth, you don't get the pleasure. And so then the next one, the Sankhya's also say that pleasure and so forth are permanent. In other words, because they're part of the primal nature, they're permanent. If something is pleasurable, it's always pleasurable. If something is painful, it's always painful. And pleasure and so forth as well are never observed as permanent. If instances of pleasure exist, why isn't the feeling apprehended? So when you put on a nice warm blanket, you put on it, when you wrap yourself in a nice warm blanket and you feel warm and it's pleasurable, it's not permanent, because once you take off the blanket, then that pleasure of being in the nice warm blanket is gone. I mean, it might last for a few minutes until your body gets cold, but it's gone. It goes away. So that's not an experience. It's not, that pleasure is not permanent. It comes and it goes. They say that the pleasure, being part of the primal nature, is permanent. And if it's, but we don't see that it remains permanent. Or we don't see that it endures. And if it's not noticed, how can it be pleasure? We spoke about this a little bit yesterday. You can only have pleasure when you're experiencing pleasure. If it's not experienced, it's not pleasure. Chocolate that is sitting on the plate is not pleasurable. It's just sitting on the plate. It's when it's actually in your mouth and melting that there is some experience of pleasure for some people. Okay, we'll go just one more bit here. And it is illogical for the permanent to have grossness or subtlety. You say that just that has become subtle, but how can it be both gross and subtle? So if you say that the pleasure is sometimes at a gross level that we can notice and sometimes at a subtle level that we don't notice, then it's not permanent, it's changing. If it's permanent, it's got to always either be gross, that is noticeable, or it's always got to be subtle, that is unnoticeable. It can't be both. And then just the last section for this morning, if they lose grossness and turn subtle, then gross or subtle, they are transient. Why do you not assert all things are similarly impermanent? If grossness is not other than pleasure, pleasure is clearly impermanent. So basically, if the feelings sometimes are manifest and visible or gross, then not gross and gross in terms of manifest, and sometimes subtle, they're impermanent, and therefore everything has to be, and you should admit that. But if you say that that quality of being either manifest or unmanifest is, if it's not separate than the pleasure, then that pleasure itself has to be, if that quality of either being manifest or not manifest is not separate than the pleasure itself, then the pleasure has to be impermanent. So I think that's enough of Shanti Deva this morning. And let's see, I think we've got time for maybe 2 questions. There's probably some questions, maybe 2 questions this morning. Then we've got one other thing we need to do in the session. Someone would like to take refuge, so we'll give the refuge vows in a few moments. But first, if there are 2 questions, if there are any cats who have questions. Yes.
So if we're operating from a Buddhist view, should we just strike the word autonomy from our vocabulary because nothing really exists independently? Is it, I mean, a good use of that word be to prove its own, to refute itself?
Mm-hmm. So the question is, if we are going to, if we're Buddhist and we say that things in Buddhism are not autonomous, should we just basically stop using the word autonomy or autonomous? Is that
yes,
right?
Yeah. I'm just thinking of it from.
So thinking of it, that nothing is truly autonomous, right? So I think that this is an interesting one in the, particularly in a society, in American society, where we talk a lot about freedom and autonomy and independence, and these are cherished values. Sometimes to the point where people don't realize they're, to the extent to which they're actually dependent upon other things. But I don't think that it means that you have to understand when we talk about autonomy. So, like, for example, if you're at work and you're going to give some of the workers at work some independence in what they do, you're giving them autonomy, and that's a use of this word that I think is perfectly reasonable on level. So we don't want to be extreme. We don't want to say in the middle way, there is no such thing as autonomy. So therefore, we're not going to use the word autonomy. Well, in the middle way, there is no such word as they. So you can't use any word. There's no word. All words are inherently illogical, and what they refer to cannot exist. And therefore, you wouldn't be able to use any language at all. So you have to use the words on a relative level. At that same time, I think it's useful for us, especially in American society, to be aware that the ideas of autonomy, independence, freedom, and so forth that we have, which are really about individuals as, individual people living in their own castles, independent of each other, is really a total myth. And there's no way, because even the person who's living out in the woods, off the grid, foraging for their own food, is completely dependent on other beings and everything else for what they're able to do. Are there any other questions? Well, oh, you've got one.
Else has one, but if we have one question, nobody has one. I'll ask.
Okay.
I'm just curious, chronology, did the middle way come before, I'm guessing, Shantideva, or did Shantideva develop his ideas and then the middle way school developed after that?
Okay. Yeah, so this is the historical question. Did the middle way come first and then Shantideva come later, or did Shantideva develop his ideas and the middle way followed? So basically, in terms of historical, the middle way teachings were present in kind of an not fully formulated form, even in some of the sutras. And certainly some of the sutras that were found in the Gandharva in the 1st and the 2nd century before the Common Era already had some middle way elements, some Mahayana middle way elements. But it's really with Nagarjuna, who is generally accepted to have been sometime between, it's like the 2nd or 3rd century of the Common Era. So that's when the middle way began, and then there were a lot of middle way philosophy developed from then. Later, the mind-only school developed, probably starting around, well, it sort of started developing a little bit after, in some ways as a reaction to the middle way school. Shantideva was later. So if you first had Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, his main disciple, who really developed the main logics of the middle way, and then you had the people like Bhava Viveka and other scholars and Chandrakirti who developed the main schools of the middle way through the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries. Shantideva was 7th century. So he follows in the tradition of the middle way, in particular the consequentialist middle way. But he wasn't a progenitor. It's like he gave a really concise, easy to remember synthesis of the middle way in this chapter. And so he's celebrated as a middle way master primarily because of this chapter and the presentations here. But he wasn't the one who, it's not like this was his original thought. This is more coming from his predecessors, in particular Nagarjuna and Aryadeva. Okay. So next we will have the refuge teaching, and I forgot to get something ready on my computer. I put it. Okay, and we'll just do it.
Turn off the recording for the ceremony?
You can leave it on. You can leave it on. Doesn't matter. So for the refuge vow, basically, when you're going for refuge, this is like the, what do we say? In a sense, it's the step where you officially become a Buddhist. In a sense, if you distinguish what is it that makes the difference between someone who's Buddhist and not Buddhist, it's whether they go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So when we talk about going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, what we're really saying is that you recognize in yourself that you don't know for yourself what to do to stop suffering. You see that there is suffering in the world. You see that you are experiencing suffering. You see that everyone around you is experiencing suffering. And you don't know how to stop it on your own. So you need someone to protect you. So if you want someone to protect you, you need someone who knows how to give you protection from suffering. For example, if you want to have someone who's going to protect you from, protect you from, in a worldly sense, if you want to be protected from enemies, you have to have people who are going to be able to protect you from your enemies. If you want someone who can protect you from illness, you need to have someone who knows about medicine, who can help you with medicine. So if we want to be able to be protected from the enemies of all karma and afflictions, if we want to be protected from the illness of samsara, the pains of samsara, we need to have someone who is like a superhero who can do all of the types of protection we need. So you have to have someone who knows how to actually protect themselves. And that has to be someone who is able to protect themselves, who has actually been able to realize the truth. If you go for refuge to someone who has not really got the ability to protect you, then the protection is going to be partial and it's not going to work. So you need to be protected by someone. You might think that your parents, I mean, we know that our parents can't protect us because for many of us, our parents are no longer here to protect us. Even if your parents are still here, then there's only limited things that your parents can do for you, no matter how much they love you. There's only so much they can do. And so we need someone who to protect us, who is proven to be able to protect it. So the Buddha came to the world. The Buddha achieved enlightenment, freed himself from suffering. And then he started teaching the Dharma, and thousands upon thousands of students in his lifetime were liberated from samsara, liberated from suffering, achieved the state of arhatship. They were able to do all sorts of miracles. They were able to do anything. And a lot of them reached arhatship and became bodhisattvas. And these disciples taught their disciples, and their disciples taught their disciples, and the teachings of the Buddha have been passed down to the present day. So when we go for refuge to the Buddha, we can go for refuge to the Buddha as our teacher, the one who gave the teachings that we can practice that have, what do we say, a proven track record of bringing people to freedom from suffering. Like if you find some guru from, some guru who finds their own religion, do they have a track record? People can say all sorts of wonderful things. They may sound really convincing. They may sound like truth tellers, but are they really telling the truth? How do you know? The way you know is by looking at the students. And we see that people who follow the teachings of the Buddha, whether they're in the Southeast Asian tradition, whether they're in the Chinese tradition, or the Japanese or Korean or the Tibetan tradition, they achieve results of freedom from suffering. So we know that we have a good teacher. But the teacher, the Buddha, does not protect us just by, it's not like the Buddha can wave a magic wand and remove us from samsara and free us from all suffering. In order for us to be freed from suffering, the Buddha teaches us, but we have to do it. And so that means we have to practice the Dharma. The Dharma is like a path, a metaphorical path. It's not like you're walking down the Dharma, but it's like you do something, it's like a step. You do a little bit of meditation, you learn how to tame your mind, you learn about how to behave ethically, to practice discipline, to know what is good and what is going to bring good results, what is bad and is going to bring harmful results. You learn that, you practice it, you see what it does in your lifetime. You take more steps, you eventually come to the point where you can do some meditation, then perhaps see the nature of the truths, and then progress down the path all the way to Buddhahood. So we follow the path, but at the same time as we're following the path, we need some help on the path, and the help is the Sangha. So the Sangha, there are different types of Sangha. Originally in Buddhism, the Sangha refers to the monastic Sangha, the people who've taken the vows, who preserved the teaching, who practiced the teaching, many of whom, especially at the time of the Buddha, had achieved various levels of results in their practice. And even to this day, there are many members of the Sangha who practice diligently, who achieve results, who are worthy of being our teachers, as being our guides along the path. Then there are also the Sangha of Bodhisattvas. These are often, we don't necessarily see the Bodhisattvas or recognize them as Bodhisattvas. And they can, of course, take any form, lay, monastic, human, non-human, who knows? But they also provide us help down the path. And then there also are cohort in a Dharma center like here in Portland, where you don't have any monastics in residence, and so it's all you. In a sense, you all have to perform the function of a Sangha, even if, traditionally you might not be called a Sangha because there are no lay people here. You could be a Bodhisattva Sangha. That's quite likely, quite possible. You would know. It's hard for me to tell. At any rate, you have to perform the function of the Sangha for each other, which is to help each other, guide each other down the path. Some have studied more, some have studied less, some have more coming in, some have further to go. People come in at different levels, but you all help each other, and you have to do the practice. And of course, then you're also not too far from other centers and other resources, and you can always, of course, reach out to people like me. We're always happy to help. That's going for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. So the Buddha is your teacher. The Dharma is the path. And the Sangha, they're your companions on the path. They help keep you. They've gone a little bit further. They say, hey, this is where, if you're going to walk down a path, you have to know where you're going, or you have to have a good guide who could take you. And that's what the function that the Sangha performs. So when you go for the refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, then we're going for refuge to the Buddha as teacher, the Dharma's path, and the Sangha as our companions on the path. And in a sense, this is something that we do all the time. Even after you've taken the formal vow of going for refuge, you still have to keep going for refuge. Because one of the big problems that we have in practicing the Dharma is that we think we know what we're doing. And therefore, because we think we know what we're doing, we don't like the advice we get, and we think we know better. Well, you have to really be, really humble and realize that basically we don't know anything. We have to rely on our gurus who have received the words of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha that have been passed down, the Dharma and the Sangha, and really rely on them to be able to make any progress along the path. So it takes a lot of humility to go for refuge, to truly go for refuge, to accept that you don't know, to accept that there are the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as your teacher. In a sense, there's a little bit of a sense of submission. In Islam, they talk about the word Islam meaning submission. Well, this is a little bit similar, In a sense, it's like your savior, but not a savior in a miraculous way of by some sort of grace or something saving you. It's only you who can save yourself. And the way to do that is to follow the teachings of the Buddha, to practice the path, and to rely on the help of your companions, the Sangha. And so if you think in this way, then this is getting towards actually taking refuge. But you take it once. And so once you've taken it, then you become sort of, what do we say, officially a Buddhist. You get given a name card or something, and that's like your Dharma name. And this Dharma name, it's kind of symbolic. Often the Dharma names are kind of random. When Rinpoche gave refuge vows, and most other lamas who give refuge vows, They say, oh, we've got X number of people providing, taking refuge tomorrow. We need X number of refuge cards. And so they make a big stack of refuge cards. They make 2 stacks, one male and one female. And then when you come up and you get refuge, you get given the card that's on top of the stack. It actually has very little to do with you personally. I hate to say it. I hate to break. Everyone wants to know, does my refuge name actually have any meaning? And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's entirely through coincidence if it does. Some people, it seems like their refuge names fit. Sometimes you wonder. But maybe sometimes that they're qualities that you need to develop. Some lazy monk who's named Karma, discipline. Or no, not discipline, diligence. Wait a minute. Why is he called diligence? And then you actually realize later that you maybe didn't realize what. Maybe he's learning what diligence means. And so there is that is what we do with the refuge vow. So I think we have one person. Charlie, you're taking the vow. So please come to the front. We'll do the refuge vow. You bring your kata and you can just... What? In the table. Underneath. Oh, there's this. Yeah. Oh, that feels like scissors. Okay. All right. So just put your kata down on the floor. Just right there, right next to your cushion. Okay. All right. And that's right there. And the first thing that you stand up first. So the first thing you have to do, you probably feel exposed. I hope not. Anyways, the first thing to do is to prostrate 3 times to the representatives of the 3 jewels. So we've got the Buddha, who's the representation of course, the jewel of the Buddha. We've got the Dharma text as a representation of the Dharma, and my robes are the representation of the Sangha, because I'm a monk, so my robes are a representation of the Sangha. So you prostrate 3 times to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so to prostrate, you join your palms to your head, forehead, your throat, and your heart. Then you kneel down, put both knees on the ground and both hands on the ground, and then bow down, touch your head to the ground. Stand up. That's 1. And then 2. Okay, then stand up and then touch your hands to your forehead, throat, and heart one last time. And now please kneel down on your right knee with your left knee raised, and then join your hands in prayer. And then repeat after me the words of this prayer. So the words of this prayer are, Master, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, think of me. Master, think of me. I named, and then you'd say your name. From now to the end of this life, or as long as I am alive, go for refuge to the Buddha, the supreme of gods and humans. I go for refuge to the Dharma, the greatest of all without attachment. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the greatest of all communities. From now until the end of this life, Master, please consider me a lay practitioner who has gone for refuge. That's the meaning of the vow. Okay? So we'll recite it in Tibetan. Sanje Tang, Sanje, Chanchup Sempa, Tamche, Dala, Gongsu So, Lopen, Dala, Gongsu So, Da Ming. Say your name. Shejue. Du, Dine, Sungte, Chisi, Tsoe Bardo, Sanje, Chomdende, Kangni Namgi Cho, La, Kyapsumchi, Duchatang, Jalwa, Namgi Cho, Chula, Kyapsum Chi, Sol Namgi Cho, Gendun La, Kyapsum Chi, oh, Kyapsum Chi. Lopen, Dala, Kyapsum, Zimpe, Genyendo, Songdu So. So that's the first repetition. So now we're going to repeat it a second time. Remembering that you're going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha for the benefit of yourself and all sentient beings. So recite it the second time. Sangye Dan, Chanchu Sempa, Tamche, Dala, Gongsu So, Lopen, Dala, Gongsu So, Da Ming. Say your name. Jisi, Soy Bardo, Sanji, Kangi, Namgi Cho, Sanje La, Kyapsum Chio, Deja Dan, Dalwa, Namgi Cho, Chula, Kyapsum Chio, So Namgi Cho, Gendun La, Kyapsum Chio, Lopen, Dala, Kyapsum Zinde, Genyen Du, Sungdu Sol. That is the second repetition. So at the end of the third repetition, I will snap my fingers and say tap yino, which means this is the method. And in response, you should say lexo. Got it? Lexo. Okay. This means that this is the way to go for refuge and you're saying very good, excellent. Lexo means basically excellent, great, right? Okay. So as you recite this the third time, it's when I snap my fingers and you say that you actually take the vow. And the reason this is because there's no other symbolic thing that would give you the vow. Like we have empowerment ceremonies where you put vases on people's head, pour water, and do stuff. But there's nothing like that when you're taking a vow. So when you're taking a vow, it's at the moment that you think to yourself, now I am taking the refuge vow. I have taken the refuge vow. By having that certainty that you've taken the vow, that is what produces the vow in your being. And once you've had it there, then the vow is always in your being for the rest of this life. And the rest of you who are listening, who are repeating along, you're taking it, you've already taken the refuge vow. So you should think to yourselves a little bit differently. Because if you kind of think to yourself that you're taking it again, then you've kind of broken the one you had. This is kind of one of those scholastic things that we talk about when you talk about the vows. So you should think to yourselves that it's very good that Charlie is taking the vow, that it's excellent, that you're remembering the vow, but you're not taking it anew. You already have the vow, so keep that in mind. Okay. So now to repeat the words of the vow the third time. Sangye Tang, Chanchup Sempa, Dala, Gongsu So, Lopen, Dala, Gongsu So, Da Ming. Say your name. Jisi, Soy Bardo, Kangi, Namgi Cho, Sangela, Kyapsum Chio, Deja Tang, Dalwa, Namgi Cho, Chula, Kyapsum Chio, Cho Namgi Cho, Cho Namgi Cho, Cho Namgi Cho, Gendun La, Kyapsum Chio, Lopen, Ba La, Kyapsum, Zinbe, Kenyendo, Sundu So, Papyano, Lexo. Okay, very good. So now, as a sign that you have gone for refuge, I will cut a small amount of hair from the top of your head, from the fontanelle, and I will also give you a new Dharma name. As I said, the Dharma names are kind of random. Although, of course, I don't have a stack of cards. I had to write one out. So please come forward and you can bring your kata in. Okay, you can sit comfortably. Yeah, you can sit here. Sit here. So now that completes the giving of the refuge vow. So now we should all, in our minds, make the prayer that Charlie, and you should also make the prayer for yourself, that you may be able to progress down the path and have no obstacles on the path, and continually be able to enjoy the richness of the Dharma. And I'm trying to remember the words of the prayer. I've heard Rinpoche say them so many times. I don't remember all the words. So instead of making the prayer, reciting the prayer, let's just all make the aspiration together that you have as much success on the path and that you have no obstacles and that all goes well for you in Dharma and worldly life. All right. So now that completes the refuge vow. So you may take your seat, or you can stay right there. Why don't you just stay right there? And again, we have gone a little bit longer. So we will, for the dedication prayers, we will just recite the dedication of merit. Osanam de tanje se bani Toneye peranam pamchele Yeganachi palatrobai Sibe tolero So thank you all very much. And so we will resume at 1:30 Eastern Time, 10:30 Pacific, or wherever you end up, whatever time zone it is for you. So thank you all very much.